All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa. And we are here on January 15th, even though it is the new year, to end season 5. And this happens every year. We get way too ambitious. We're like, yeah, listen, we're going to record right up until this date. And then it's the end of the year, man. It's the holidays. Right. And everything gets in the way. But I love that you and I are always so ambitious. We're like, yeah, we're gonna do this. And we really, truly believe that we are.
We're going to do it this time.
Yeah, it won't be like the last time, baby. I promise. So we were throughout the vast majority of season 5 doing the Year of the Monster. And we decided to end the Year of the Monster in December with the Month of the Demon. Right. And so we did a couple of possession movies. We did The Taking of Deborah Logan. We did When Evil Lurks. And we decided we were going to end with The Exorcist. Yes. Now, for those of you who are longtime fans of the show, thank you, Mom. For those of you that are longtime fans of the show, The Exorcist was the very first episode that we did. And so to do it on, I don't know that 150 is an anniversary episode, right? But it feels right, I think, to 150 episodes later, we're still doing this thing. We're still talking about horror. And The Exorcist is where that started. So when Neri, Jeff, and I started this show, we went back and forth on a couple of different movies. I threw out, I want to say it was the Night of the Living Dead. I'm pretty sure we threw out Nightmare on Elm Street. There's another one that I can't remember what it was now. And I mentioned it recently. I was like, yeah, that was one that we talked about doing at the beginning of the show. Somehow we ended up on Exorcist. And The Exorcist, I think, is one of these like ubiquitous movies. You can't talk about horror without mentioning The Exorcist. Right. So, Daniel, what's your relationship with The Exorcist? Like, what's your history with this movie?
So, The Exorcist is in a lot of ways my emergence into loving horror at the depth, like starting to get it at the depth that I love it now. When I was 11, I was staying the night with a buddy, and his dad took us to Blockbuster, and we were like, oh, we want to rent something scary. I was 11, mind you. And his dad is like, oh, you guys want to watch something scary? There's a movie from when I was a kid. And he rents The Exorcist. And so 11-year-old, so 11-year-old, like I had watched like scary movies before, just like the Trailer Park Double Features and stuff like that would come on TBS and TNT and all that. And so this thing really kind of opened my eyes to what it was like to be absolutely terrified by a movie. And so this movie is really special to me too, because this is the type of movie that can really make or break you as a horror fan. There's a lot in this movie that is now, tropes and things that are executed just over and over and over again, that if you don't like in this movie, you're not going to like when somebody does their take on it 20 years later. So You know, and this movie is scary. It is graphic. It is deep. There are a lot of
Mhm.
really bizarre levels to this movie. If you want to get into it, this is a movie that I go back to again and again and again when I need that fix of we all get kind of you get bogged down with this stuff sometimes, and you're watching these movies all the time. You're like, man, when is something really gonna scare me again? You can always go back to The Exorcist.
You can.
It's always gonna scare you. To that point, so 11-year-old Daniel saw this movie. Fast forward 6 years, I'm 17, and they do a re-release of this movie in theaters. And
Oh,
so
with all the new scenes that had
yes.
been put back in.
And so
Yeah.
I'd seen it 2 or 3 times in the 6 years between. So I'm thinking like, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm ready for The Exorcist." I was unaware of the fact that this was some director's cut with
Mhm.
additional scenes, and the closest I have ever come to actually shitting my pants in a movie theater was in the director's cut when she crab walks down the stairs.
Oh boy.
Thank God my girlfriend at the time that I was taking was not just completely like done with me, because I'm like talking a big game about how I've seen The Exorcist so many times, and I'll be there for you, baby. It's okay. Yeah, it's scary, but we're going to be fine. I screamed. I legitimately thought that something had been expelled from the lower half of my body. It was rough. Like when a surprise like that comes from a movie you've seen so many times, that'll get you.
Yeah, I do remember the first time I saw the director's cut or extended cut. I can't remember what they call that version of The Exorcist. And when I was deciding which version of the movie to watch for this episode, I decided to go with the original theatrical cut.
I
And
did
I
too.
I think it's because I've seen that extended cut so many times now that in a lot of ways, to me, that is the definitive version of The Exorcist, except that this is the one that started it all. This
Right.
cut of the movie. And so I was like, you know what? If we're going back to the roots of Shiver and where Shiver began, we should go back to the roots of The Exorcist and see where it began. And I'm glad to say it is still scary
Yeah.
without all those other scenes that were initially pulled from the movie for one reason or another. The crab walk scene, for example, was not pulled because it was too graphic or too scary. It was done with wires, and there was no way that they could light it convincingly, and it would have
Right.
taken an insane amount of time and money to remove those wires frame by frame back in 1974, is it? 73, 74?
73.
So, it just wasn't possible. But with computer technology, when the re-release is coming out, it's like, "Hey, just delete that."
Yeah.
Very easy to do, and now the
Magic
scene
eraser.
works. Yeah, exactly. Now the scene works. There's I was expecting to miss those scenes, and I didn't remember those scenes until after the movie was over. I was like, "Oh man, the crab walk wasn't there."
Yeah.
There is a great flow to this movie. Like, as a movie, you take out the fact that it's a horror movie, but as a movie, this really, really works.
Yes.
And it's very easy to forget in the horror world because you don't see a name like Craven or Cunningham or Romero or or Carpenter attached to this movie. It's very easy to forget that William Friedkin is one of the most amazing directors in Hollywood history. Um, I'll just lead with this: French Connection.
There you
You
go.
don't need to know anything else other than French Connection. I mean, the dude's won Oscars, and he brings such a documentary style to this movie, which is where he kind of began, was in documentary. So it feels real. There's a lot of this movie that to me just feels real. It feels raw. It feels like someone put a camera down and said, "Go."
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes this movie work so well, I think, is that the horror seems real. And I spoke the last couple of weeks that we did the Demon. I spoke about how um my lack of faith kind of makes these movies sometimes not so interesting to me. You spoke about how these movies tend to make the church and religion the hero, and it's like, oh
Right.
yeah, you've got to turn to this prayer, or you've got to turn to this ritual to rid yourself of this evil. And the older I get, the less into the church I get, um, the less attractive that is for me as a viewer. So I've kind of stayed away from The Exorcist for a little while, but coming back to it now, it's a really good story, man. It's
Yeah.
a really, really good story. It's really, really scary. And there's not one point in the movie where I, as a skeptic, say, come on.
Yeah. Right.
Everything just works. Everything just works. From the moment that she starts talking, I'm getting goosebumps now, that she starts talking about Captain Howdy. And I, as a return viewer here, I'm like, oh, girl, you done fucked up, right? You played with the Ouija, you're gonna find out, right? And then when you get that, keep away, the sow is mine.
Yeah.
Man, I shudder. I've got, I mean, I don't know how high def my camera is, but the goosebumps are real, man. There is something about this movie. It doesn't matter how many times I see it, because this is one that I would repeatedly go back to Blockbuster for.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, there really is something about this movie, even when you remove the historical context of what it did, not just for horror movies, but to the world in general. And we'll get to that
Mhm.
part in a little bit. But it's even when you remove that and you just look at it as just this movie that you're spending 2 hours with, it's powerful. This
It is.
movie is powerful. And so, speaking of that, let's get into the story section that we're calling a vulgar display of power after just one of the
Aptly named.
hardest lines in movie history. So we've got the story of Reagan. Her mom is an actress. You know, her parents are recently divorced. They're getting by. You get mixed vibes on exactly how successful her mother is as an actress, but things definitely seem to be going their way before Reagan ends up possessed. And you know, there's a lot that goes into this before we actually meet the exorcist and
Mhm.
get the exorcism. So take us through the story of this movie, and what is it for you that makes it powerful, that makes it to where it's still scary now 50 years later?
I made a realization, or rather, let me not call it a realization. That sounds grandiose. I made a connection with this movie and boxing movies.
I'm
Um,
I'm listening.
yeah, you had my attention. So the way that those movies are typically laid out, right? Like those sports movies where like some guy's gonna come up to a matchup. You lay out all the players involved first, right?
Right.
This is we're gonna see this guy. We're gonna see this other guy. We're gonna see this other guy. These are all and then we follow their stories in chronological order, and we're jumping around until the big match where these two incredible athletes are going to come to blows. That's the way most boxing movies are laid out. And I feel like that's the approach that Friedkin took to this movie, because it starts and you're like, this is the Middle East.
Right.
Where the fuck are we? Because every image I have ever seen of this movie in a trailer
It's in
is in
Georgetown.
Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but where the fuck are we? And we stay in where is it? Iran, where
Iran,
they
yeah.
are. Yeah, we stay there for like 8 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a considerable amount of time, and it's all to set up who Father Marin is. It's slow but necessary. You absolutely need to crawl through Father Marin's setup, who we don't see again. He's not mentioned again until like maybe 10 minutes before the actual exorcism.
Yeah.
And the movie's called The Exorcist. It's named after him.
Yeah, like
right?
it's easy to forget that Carvis isn't the Exorcist. He's just the dude that was available when shit hit the fan.
Yeah. So then after him, we're finally introduced to, and it's brilliant the way that this is done, because they introduce Ellen Bernstein and then they introduce Father Karras at the same time. In at the set at Georgetown, right? And then we follow her and we see her story. We're introduced to Reagan. Reagan is the last major character we meet, and by all accounts, she's the star of the show. So we meet all these characters, and then we're allowed for their stories to grow. But we're not allowed for Father Marin's story to grow because Father Marin's story doesn't need to grow.
Right.
He really doesn't play a role until the very end of this. And in fact, I think the only reason why we get him at all is because had someone just randomly pulled his name out, we would have stopped caring. So you need to set him up, and he needs to be an extraordinary person. What kind of priest is in Iran on an archaeological dig and having some sort of very clearly metaphysical standoff with a demon?
Right.
Like it's also beautifully shot.
Oh,
like beyond the way that this movie is edited, Friedkin knows how to compose his shots, man. Like you've seen French Connection, right?
Yeah.
Dude, the that train chase in French Connection might very possibly be the greatest car chase of all time.
Right.
It's that fucking good. So like Friedkin knows what he's doing with a camera, and yet there's really not a lot of movement in this movie. It's a lot of static images. There's like little tilts and little pans, but there's not a lot of really complex camera movements here. It's just, I'm gonna put this here and you're gonna watch what's unfolding. It's very voyeuristic. I felt like I was being allowed in on some secret, which is very much what exorcism feels like. And they say that in the movie, that it's a secret in the church, and no one, not even priests, because Father Karras says, he goes, you know as much about exorcisms as I do.
Yeah.
Right? It's amazing that that's the stylistic choice that he chooses to make, because it really puts you in this story. So I love the way that the story is laid out, because it's all building tension to the final showdown. And and that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like these two titans being allowed to get into a ring and punch each other to death.
Yeah.
It's Marin with the support of Karras and Pazuzu just going at it.
Yeah, there was something about this movie on this rewatch that it had never really sunk in with me in the times I'd seen it before, as just being younger, and before this show I didn't do a lot of like in-depth analysis of the movies I watched. Like, not that I remembered, have a couple beers and start talking about something. But one thing that really set in, and you met there, is the tension. So many times when I was younger and I was watching this movie, I was just kind of riding through all of the stuff that got me to when the scary stuff started, because I wasn't watching horror movies as films. I was watching them as sideshow attractions. Like, let's get to the good stuff, like,
I think a lot of people do that, and that might be why this movie's stock has not improved in the last maybe 15 or 20 years.
And so now watching it as somebody who's looking for these things that set it apart, who's trying to put my finger on what makes this movie special, what makes it scary. You know, there's more to it than that. The way that they build everything, the way that we slowly watch Reagan dissolve as a human being is what I found to be the scariest part of this movie this time around. I wasn't just in it for like, okay, let's get to the gross stuff and the weird stuff and the scary stuff. I found myself being just absolutely terrified by the slow destruction of this innocent child, this girl who had done nothing wrong and was just there in not a great situation. You know, her mom is having these parties and she's kind of there as like an attraction for these parties, and she's just kind of roped into all this, but it's the life she's lived, so she doesn't see anything wrong with it. And then you just watch her humanity just flake off of her until that final scene where she's, you know, like slumped over the body of Father Marin and is just laughing. And in that moment, for that brief moment, there's none of Reagan left.
Yeah, it's nothing.
Yeah, Reagan is no more. She is now solely Pazuzu. And I found that to be so scary because you know, and I actually started to kind of relate it back to the taking of Deborah Logan in a very different way. We talked during the taking of Deborah Logan about how we both have very personal experiences with losing loved ones to dementia. And when we watched the taking of Deborah Logan, she was an older lady and it hit you on that level. Watching this now, I found myself, we've often had the discussion of like doing a movie, you know, like what movies, you know, scare you the most personally. And we've had those and different things. And I've come to realize that when I'm watching these possession movies, what's so scary to me is this idea of being here, but not being here. Right. You know, that there's one thing is the idea of being scared of dying. That's a very real thing that you know, a lot of people have. You want to be here, you want to experience it, you don't know what comes next. But it's so much scarier, the idea that I could be gone, but this that you're looking at is still kind of there, right? And that it just slowly slips away. And so I started drawing lines between this and the taking of Deborah Logan in how it made even more sense now that I was sitting through this really in-depth analysis of The Exorcist to put dementia as a catalyst in that scenario. So I ended up finding just that part, you know, like to just be terrifying. And there are some truly scary and gruesome and shocking moments in this movie. But that thing that hits you just deep in your soul is that idea of my family watching me slip away and having absolutely nothing that they can do about it. No matter how much money and time and doctors and all of this that they're pouring into it, nothing is working. And they're desperately hanging on to whatever shreds of me are left. And you know, Chris is holding on to everything she can that's still Reagan. That ends up being so damn scary. And they build that so masterfully, from starting with Reagan doing things that a little girl does. You know, she wants a horse. She's in the basement painting. You know, she steals a cookie in the party and runs away laughing. You know, all of those things that are just quintessential childhood innocence. They force feed us that stuff when we first meet Reagan. And if it's your first time watching it, it might not really settle in with you how absolutely vital it is that we get these scenes that show us that Reagan was a sweet, normal little girl.
You need it.
You have to have that. And just, the pacing of this movie, it really does. It takes a while before shit really goes sideways, but not for 1 second does any of that time ever feel wasted.
No. No, and the thing is that it's such a slow but steady ramp up, because I'm pretty sure that from the very first scene, Pazuzu is present,
Right.
because the moment they find that statue and it's broken, Pazuzu has broken out, and Pazuzu is out there, and he's just looking for the moment to latch on to someone. And we realize pretty early on that there's this Ouija board, and we see Reagan use it, but she also says that she has been using it.
Right.
So
By herself, rule number 1.
Yeah. So Pazuzu has been present the entire movie, and we haven't realized it. So that that slow build really is a slow but steady, consistent build. There's a lot of movies that like slowly ramp up, and then there's like one moment where it's just like, okay, here, this is where it takes off. And The Exorcist is not that way.
Right.
It's a very steady, consistent climb, so that you almost don't even notice the tensions being built, because the next scene is only slightly more tense than the one that came before it, until you're realizing that what's happening is insanity.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, well, then this is the great thing about this movie, is that there's never a release of the tension. And I've talked about how, like, when everything is up at 11, you're never given a chance to breathe, to recover, right? Like a roller coaster, right? You've got those, the peaks and the valleys, and that's what makes roller coasters so great. But there's a different approach also, which is that I'm just steadily going to climb this mountain.
just
Because
a roller coaster that's just clicking for the first like 30 minutes.
It's always clicking.
Yeah.
And then you get to the top and you realize the track wasn't built. You get to the top and you descend immediately into hell. It's a really unique approach to storytelling, because that's not the way stories are usually told. In fact, that's not even the way stories used to be told either, because the idea of ramping tension, release of tension, ramping tension, release of tension, that is
very
classic.
Tantric.
It is very tantric, and that's not what this is at all. This is a steady build up to the top, and then once there's release, the movie's over.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you're given almost no opportunity to recover from what has happened, because that end is so powerful. Man, when you see what was that priest's name?
Karras?
Not Karras. No. Father Dyer. When you see Father Dyer run over and realize who it is that's on the floor there, and he holds his hand and he asks for his confession, and all he's getting is that like slow sort of like hand movement. Man, that's devastating.
Yeah.
It's absolutely devastating. It kills you, dude. It kills you. And at the end of the movie, to see that Reagan has no knowledge of this thing, like she's totally unchanged by everything that's happened, but everyone around her, their lives are just destroyed. Because McNeil's never going to be the same way.
No,
she's never going to be the same. Father Dyer's never going to be the same. Marin's dead. Karras is dead. It's like destruction has just come through like a tsunami, and there's nothing left, which does kind of, even though it doesn't intentionally, it does set up the sequel, where it's like, yeah, so because Reagan never addressed any of this stuff, it does leave her susceptible to this happening again. She needs to be prepared for the future. And if, as the parent, you're like, I don't want this trauma ever existing in her. I'm going to ignore all of this. Then that's, to me, that is the thing that this time around was most arresting about the story, was the parent side of this, the utter helplessness that McNeil has in trying to do something for her daughter, and not being able to do anything. Because I've been there where, and thankfully it wasn't anything nearly as serious as even what medically it seems like Reagan has. But I've been there where it's like, why can't you, as a medical professional, or this other medical professional, or this other why can't you guys just tell me what the fuck is wrong with my kid so I can do whatever I need to do, whatever I can physically possibly do to make him better?
Right.
It's the worst feeling in the world to not be able to do something for someone you love. And the last time I saw this movie was the first time we did it on the podcast. And I had one kid, and he was more of a potato than a person at that point. I hadn't really had an opportunity to feel that way. So I was a parent, and, you know, already I kind of think of it almost like a light switch. Like, you become a parent and there's a switch that's flipped, and it's like, yep, I'm not nearly as important as this thing sitting in front of me right here. But those experiences that drive this sort of storytelling, I hadn't had an opportunity to experience that. So coming back to this movie now, so many years later, and experiencing it as a parent, man, Bernstein did one hell of a job, because I could see the pain in her eyes.
Man, yes. So I've got a question for you.
Mhm.
So, and this is one that I'm always kind of torn about. Do you feel, or has it been just outright said, and I didn't see it anywhere, that there was an illicit relationship, or at least an attempt at one, between Burke Dennings and Reagan? And that is why he ends up dead, because, you know, why else would he have been in her room that night? Right. And so, I mean, because we're immediately shown that Burke is not a great dude once he's had a couple of drinks.
Right.
Right. And so have you ever thought about that, or made that connection, that part of this, you know, part of this is that weird idea of also telling the sub story about, like, the dark underbelly of Hollywood is just like a kind of like small B storyline?
You know, I never thought about it until you asked right now. But now that you mention it, it does kind of put into context the conversation that Reagan and Chris have earlier in the movie. She's like, "Oh, are you going to marry Burke?" She's obviously concerned, right? Why else would she ask? Although she and Chris seem to have a really open and honest relationship. So maybe they do have the sort of relationship where she can just ask her mom something like that. You know, my aunt and her daughters were kind of like that, like very open, very Gilmore Girls, to put it in a more contemporary thing. But I think it's possible that there was something about him that she found uncomfortable, and that's why that happened. He's clearly not a good dude.
Right.
Right. Because everything that happens with the valet is just, I mean, it's beyond reproach.
Right.
Maybe because Chris does question, like, what would he have been doing in that room in the first place? Now, there's also, we are given more than suggestion that Reagan will leave the room,
right,
to go incite incident, as it were. We see that with the, you know, you're gonna die up there, and then urinating on the rug. In the extended cut, we see the whole crab walk downstairs. So she will leave the room. I think it is possible that something occurred that caused him to bring her upstairs. I think
Right.
that's a possibility as well. The detective, I always forget his name. Kill something.
Oh, yeah. The main
Kinderman.
Kinderman.
Yeah, Lieutenant Kinderman. Lieutenant Kinderman finds a little sculpture of Reagan's at the
Mm-hmm.
bottom of the steps where Burke was pushed. So, to me, that indicates that there was some connection there, whether she went downstairs to get it as a a reason to interact with him and kill him, whether he saw it and brought it up to her. I don't know exactly, and they never explained that. And I think that that's one of the strengths of this movie is that there's never a we're going to stop to explain what happened here. It's just enough suggestion for you to say, okay, there's a connection there.
Right.
And maybe it's because it was oversight. Maybe it's because I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that I enjoy moving at that pace where it's seemingly slow, but there's so much happening in quite literally every frame of this movie.
Yeah. See, and that's kind of where I found myself with this when I started to kind of have that thought, because that line that you mentioned that Chris says, why would he have been in her room? And it was the first time that one really stuck out to me. And I was like,
Mhm.
that is a good point. Like, what is this drunk older dude like doing walking into this little girl's room, at night, leaving himself in a position to be murdered by and thrown out a window. And so, and I started to think, and I was like, well, he is, yeah, he's a shit dude. Like and like I said, I thought back to that conversation between Reagan and Chris, and it's like there's obviously something there that she's not liking. Now, granted,
Mhm.
kids sometimes just don't like people because they're shitty people, and kids just, will just tell you that somebody's shitty,
Yeah.
right? And so, I was kind of back and forth with that. And yeah, we saw the whole thing where she would get the attention, she would scream and cry and get people to come into the room so that she could carry on with whatever kind of the next step of her plan was going to be. We see Chris come running into the room and the dresser slides over and slams the
Mhm.
door shut. So she has to be face to face with really just the first time when it's just fucking bonkers
Yeah.
in the room. And so we see all these different things, and Father Marin tells us, the demon will tell you things. He's going to try to incite a reaction from you. Just don't react to anything. So yeah, there's a possibility that he's there. She says something, we hear the different voices and stuff and the different languages. So all of that's a possibility. I kept finding myself in this place where like the scenes where she's undergoing all the medical procedures
Mhm.
are so I don't know, they're so, I feel like graphic is the right word. They're
Yeah.
because
Explicit.
yeah, explicit.
Mhm.
There we go. They're so explicit in the way that they show us how all these medical experiences are going down, and the clanking of the machinery, and it makes you realize what an actual awful process that all of this that she's having to go through is.
Mhm.
And some things, and I just kept kind of drawing these lines to the fact that so much of the story of this movie seems to be showing us that while she is corrupted by a literal demon, it does seem to be using sights and sounds showing us about just how things that we see, that happen in the real world are just as powerful and just as scary. And then I had this weird moment where it was just like, maybe that's why he was in there. Maybe that's why he gets, maybe that's why he ends up killed. We know that once Reagan is strapped to the bed, that we learn by the end of it, she could have got up whenever the hell she wanted. Like
Right.
that, that she absolutely could have. And it seems like a bluff at first, far too much of a vulgar display of power. And it's like, oh, I get it, because you can't. So you're talking that shit.
Mhm.
But then at the end, we see she can. And so you start to like put these things together, and it's just we, the whole crucifix scene, which, as somebody who doesn't have a vagina, I feel pain watching that. So I can
Yeah.
only imagine if you had one, and might even be able to have an inkling of what it would feel like. But so many of those things seem to be not only direct corruptions of Reagan as just a human being in general, but direct corruptions of her innocence specifically. And
Right.
and so I started to kind of think through some of our, some of the other, just demonology stuff about what it takes to let the demon in, and if there was some sort of lingering trauma from this, from this man molesting, possibly raping her, whatever it may be, just sexually assaulting her in some way, then that leaves her broken, and there are cracks there. And so I started to connect those pieces in a way that I just hadn't before. So I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, listen, I think that there is so much going on with this movie. And I think that Friedkin's approach was, these are regular people who have something totally irregular thrust upon them. Maybe part of that commentary is that this is a regular part of being a child.
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't know that Friedkin has ever commented on that, because I do remember watching quite a bit of extended features and behind the scenes and stuff like that, because I bought I don't know if it was the 40th anniversary Blu-ray set or something like that, and I don't know. I'm really curious now to go back and see if he's ever commented on that, because Friedkin was a guy who always spoke very, very candidly. He cared nothing for the Hollywood system, for actors. Like he really was kind of an artist, kind of like Kubrick, like just one of these
Right.
guys. He's like, listen, you're here for me. I'm the artist, and you're going to do what I tell you to do, or I'm not making this movie, sort of thing. So so he always was very open and honest about what it is he was trying to do, and always assumed, I think, that people were too stupid to understand it. So I feel like I've seen him be very, very forthcoming with information so that everyone understood his vision. So man, that's brilliant, though.
Like I said, it's just kind of just this weird moment I had while watching it, and I just kind of, like I said, I started it just I was looking for something more to it than just, the corruption of this little girl. I was trying
Yeah.
to find why it happened to her, and what the greater purpose of this particular girl would have been. And that's just kind of where I went. So as we're talking about all these people, we've said a whole lot of names. We've
Mhm.
said a ton of them. So let's get into those characters. Let's talk about the standout performances in a section we're calling Washington and Vatican Meet. I mean, we've said a lot of names. We've talked a lot about them. I mean, who stands out for you, man?
Okay, so I think when we first did this, the first person I mentioned was Jason Miller as Father Karras. And I think that's a logical place to go to. But this time around, who I'm going to mention is Ellen Burstyn as Chris McNeil. My God, what a performance.
Oh, jeez.
And although this is clearly Linda Blair's movie,
Right.
as an adult, I now watch this movie through Chris McNeil's eyes. When I saw this as a kid, because I saw this probably around the same age that you were, my parents were not big horror movie people. the only horror movie I seem to remember my parents ever talking about was The Exorcist. And they both mentioned that it was so scary that either they didn't finish watching it in theaters, or it was one of those things where, like, you'd go rent it, and you'd see who would stand up and leave the room first, sort of thing. I saw this young with my dad, and I remember only thinking through Reagan's eyes and being terrified that one day maybe I could be possessed. That's not my fear with this movie now. The fear I have with this movie now is exactly what Chris McNeil goes through. And I think that she does such a great job at being wounded, such a great job at being vulnerable, at being totally impotent, at being a raging asshole, and rightfully so, because I know what it's like to feel like I need to accomplish something, and you, the moron, is standing in my way. Like,
Right.
just get out of my way so that I can go and do what it is that I need to do. Everyone seems to be an obstacle for her because she's a woman on a mission. I think that there is something magical about her performance. Just like Kubrick, to go back to Kubrick, Friedkin fucking abused her on set. There's a really famous story. I don't know if you know this story about how she got injured on set. The scene, keep away the sow is mine scene. She gets slapped and she goes flying across the room, right?
Yeah.
She hits her head on the back of the on the wall, and we see her kind of like grab her head and like grab her back, and then she looks over, and then the whole wardrobe pushes the door shut. So the way that scene was supposed to play out is she was supposed to kind of like jump backwards, and Friedkin told her, like, after a couple of takes, he was like, listen, it's not working. It looks like you're jumping backwards. He goes, we're going to put a little harness on you, and we're just going to yank you backwards. She was like, aren't I going to fall and get hurt? And he was like, no, don't worry. We're going to put something down here. Everything's going to be fine. He was okay, cool. So they put a little something down for her, right? So behind the wall, like, they had this little hole that they, with a Dremel or something, like, drilled into the wall, and they had a cable attached to her, and so they yell action, and they yank on that cable, but it ain't one dude yanking on the cable. It's like a whole fleet of dudes yanking on that cable, and she goes flying back about as fast as you can throw a softball, man. And she lands on her tailbone because she bangs against the back wall. She doesn't hit the floor. So she goes flying against, she hits her head, she hits her back, she broke her tailbone.
Jeez.
And that's why the scream that you see from her in the movie seems so genuine, and why she's reaching for her back. Like, she's literally just fractured her coccyx.
Oh my God.
And she was pissed. She walked, I mean, I don't know if she walked. She was probably, taken on a stretcher off the set. And when she saw the final cut of the movie, she asked Friedkin, she was like, is that the take that I think it is? And he goes, yeah. She was like, why would you use that? He was like, why wouldn't I? It's a performance that I kind of like with the Hans Gruber thing, like, okay, we're going to drop you on 3, and then they drop him on 2. So you get the reaction. It's one of those things where it's like, it's so good, the acting, that it's not even really acting. Right. She is a fucking rock star. I haven't seen the newest one, the David Gordon Green,
Exorcist Believer.
I think that's the one. I know that she appears in it, and
she does.
I really want to watch it.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah.
It ain't great, but it's not bad. It's got Aaron Burr in it. He does a great job. So
Aaron Burr, sir.
There we go. So I want to talk about somebody who technically the film is named after, even though we see him the least, and that's Max von Sydow as Father Merrin.
Mm-hmm.
This dude brings so much gravitas to what he does.
That is the right
Not
word.
one time that he's on screen am I ever wondering whether or not this is the dude that gets shit done. I mean, from the beginning of the movie, before we know anything about him, it's like, man, this guy's in something, but he's cautious, but he's not scared. And so then when he finally does show up, I mean, he walks in, gets the lay of the land, and he's like, yep, I need my robe. I need the purple sash. It's got a regular name too, but a real name too, but I don't remember it. And let's go.
Yeah.
And he gets down to business, and he is stoic in just absolutely everything he's doing. He is firm in everything he tells Karis needs to be done. Like the way that he just commands the situation from the minute that he walks in just is incredible. And I mean, you know, it's if you're watching this and it's from 73 and you're like, God, that guy looks familiar. Yeah, he does. He's done a ton of movies.
Yeah.
You have seen him in plenty of things. This is just him 50 years ago. Right. So, but the way that Max von Sydow just carries himself in this movie, like I felt a certain level of comfort when he showed up. It was like, okay, yeah, right. Big guns. Now we're gonna get this settled. We're gonna save Reagan. Everything's gonna be fine because Father Merrin's here, and you feel it kind of wash over you, especially when we've gotten to that point where physically and mentally, Chris and Karis are just so exhausted, and they've gone through so much, and Karis is trying to get this help, and he's already a man who his faith has been called into question by himself. And he's exhausted from trying to deal with the church, and she's exhausted from just living through this. And I mean, Merrin does everything but kick in the door and say, let's light this motherfucker. Like that's, and if he did, I'd have been like, on point. That's brand. That's on brand. Like he's just, he does such a great job of handling everything down to the point that when they walk away from like the first part of the exorcism and they're resting, and Karis, who was just the assistant, is the one who just looks exhausted and bedraggled. And you know, like Merrin looks tired, but he's got the whole stiff upper lip thing going.
He's ready. You know? He's ready to keep rocking and rolling.
Exactly. He's like, yeah, it's round one. I mean, let's get some water and spit it in the bucket, Chief. We got shit to do. And it's amazing the way the tone of the movie changes when he walks in, from these two people that are just absolutely terrified by everything they're seeing, to this guy who's like, yeah, demon, got this, let's go. And I love the way that the movie shifts when he comes in, down to just what is one of the most badass, entrance shots ever. The one that if you're watching,
you're seeing it right
you
now,
can see in the background. It's on the damn slip cover of the movie. It is. You're talking about Friedkin framing a shot. This is one of the sickest ways that any character has ever been introduced into a main storyline. I mean, the guy just kills it. It was unbelievable.
It's I said earlier that Merrin is introduced and then the movie carries on without him until the very end, but that's a lie. It's a lie, because his presence is occasionally felt if you've seen the movie before, because I don't know that they ever say his name until they mention, like, oh, what about Merrin?
Right.
towards the end of the movie. The demon Pazuzu, when you play backwards what was being said, which was being said backwards, so they're actually playing it forwards. It says not him, not Merrin.
Yeah.
And so upon rewatch, that's one of those things where it's like, for starters, they never say the word Pazuzu. They never say the name Pazuzu in this movie.
You know, and it's funny with all the time that it has been removed since I watched this. I realized that, like, it's one of those bits of knowledge that I had, so I just kind of assumed it was said somewhere in the movie. And I did notice on this rewatch, I was like, wait, they never actually said Pazuzu.
They never say it. You see the statue of Pazuzu, and it is I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it is like a fairly authentic statue of Pazuzu. But they never say that. It's kind of like Boba Fett. They never say Boba Fett in Empire Strike Back. Like, who is that guy? He's just a bounty hunter. He's the dude. He's that fucking badass looking dude over there. They never say the name Pazuzu. It's just, him and his rock hard erection statue, and it is in fact rock hard.
Yeah.
So it's when he gets to the house and he walks through the door and the demon says, Marin.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's when you know, right? That's fucking Ivan Drago and Rocky Balboa walking into the ring.
Yeah.
That's the hey, I got you, motherfucker. We're gonna go at it right now. It's amazing the way that he sets up everything so perfectly, and then everything is just matter of fact for him because he's got no time for your bullshit.
Yeah,
it's like, we're here to exorcise this demon, and he's like, why do I need to know any of the background of the demon? I'm like, I believe there's three personalities that have manifested. He goes, there's only one.
Yeah, just the one.
Don't get into this with it. Don't listen to it. It's gonna lie to you. And the way that he tells Karis, like, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something like, you may leave, when Karis is like battling with Pazuzu. And it's very clear that it's like, you are not fit for this. I was going to do this on my own. I let you be here. Please exit the fucking room. It's so good. And I don't know that anyone but Max von Sydow could have played that role.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Absolutely incredible. Okay, so I am going to mention it's I'm torn because I know we're going to talk about the demon, but I want to talk about Linda Blair.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to talk about Linda Blair as Reagan, not Linda Blair as Pazuzu. So Linda Blair as Reagan is, I think, a really underappreciated performance because there's so many amazing adult actors in this movie, and the movie has become so iconic that it's almost easy to overlook the most iconic performance in there. Kind of like with The Wizard of Oz, it's kind of weird to think about it, but shit, what's her name from The Wizard of Oz? Judy Garland. Thank you. Wow, what a brain fart. Judy Garland is fucking incredible in that movie. And we just think of it as, oh, well, that's Judy Garland.
Right.
Like that's The Wizard of Oz. She's Dorothy. That's it. Like that's just what it is because it's so it's so huge.
It's just
like
ubiquitous.
It's a Zeppelin. It's a monolith. And it's like, how do you address this thing? You can't. It just is, right? Linda Blair is on that level of iconic for horror, and her performance is solid. Like, there is no way that you can chip away at this thing and be like, yeah, but she was a child actress. Like, no. For anyone, that performance fucking rocks because the way that she's able to give innocence, the way that she's able to give playfulness, the way where I'm not certain if it's Reagan or if it's Pazuzu at that moment, because it could be either one. Maybe it is both. Dude, that is such a complex performance. And for for me to be able to look at someone and immediately pity them. Oh, man, it's such a weird thing because I don't know, man. Like that for me, the lasting thing there is when Karis is dead and Chris comes running into the room and Marin is dead on the floor, right? Chris comes into the room and she doesn't know what to do because there's Marin, there's Reagan, and she knows that Reagan killed Burke. And
Right.
she knows that Reagan killed Marin. And she doesn't see Karis anywhere. So she's assuming Reagan killed Karis. And here's her little girl. And she's going, Mommy, help me. Mommy, help me. Bro, that's wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. Because you look at it and it's like, bro, run to your daughter. But then at the same time, it's like, dude, I've just seen her do stuff that, like, I don't know that I can run and hug her.
Yeah.
And she's so innocent. She's so it's arresting. Like, it stops you in your tracks.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean, this performance from Linda Blair, I mean, it ruined her career to
Yeah,
a
kinda.
certain extent.
Mhm.
For a while, she was so fucking good at this that she just had like this nuclear heat to her that people were thinking that she would never be able to be anything but Reagan. We can't just go cast her in other things because they're just going to see Reagan, and we're not. Well, this is a romantic comedy, you know, or whatever. Like we're not. We don't need this person that everybody just automatically assumes, you know, or associates, not assumes, associates with possession. Sure, her performance, you know, and like you said, we're gonna get to the demon. But what's amazing is it's easy to forget that what is presented to us here as Pazuzu is performance from Linda Blair. The
Mhm.
fact that she completely and totally sold us on this idea that she was possessed. You know, I talked earlier about how the terrifying part was watching her humanity flake away. That's
Mhm.
thanks to Linda Blair giving us the performance of a lifetime.
Yeah.
This was pulled off in a way that no one has done better since. People have grabbed at that brass ring and brushed it with their fingertips, but no one has snatched it and made it their own. Any and all demonic possessions from 1973 forward are just
Judged here. Mhm.
recreations of Linda Blair as Reagan, because she set the bar so unbelievably high. And like you said, it's you oh well, she was just a child actress, and but no, fuck out of here with all that. Like, miss me with that. Like, she went out there in this movie and made you believe that she was a possessed girl, and you watched her destruction as a human being. I mean, you talk about scenes that still give you chills no matter how many times you've watched it. That fucking giggle when Karis walks back in the room and Marin is dead. Dude, right now thinking about it, chills, entire body. It's terrifying. And she just killed it. It's unreal to go back and watch this movie and see what she brought to the screen. It's absolutely unbelievable what she was able to do, how well, I mean, just how big the buy-in is on everything that's going on with her. And yeah, man, to go from that giggle to the mommy, mommy, help me, just that shit, like it gets me. It gets me every single time. Like I said at the top, this is a movie. If I'm ever just feeling, you know, just kind of bleh about the current state of horror or whatever the last couple of movies I've watched are or whatever. This is one where it's like
palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's go watch The Exorcist and remember that 50 years ago, the formula was there. Like, people knew what they were doing, and that's not shitting on modern horror. We just watch a lot of horror movies, and a lot of times they're bad. If you watch a lot of anything, a lot of them are bad.
Yeah,
like, meh. And so she really was just she was amazing.
Yeah.
And then the other side of looking at her, of course, is looking at Jason Miller as father/Dr. Karras.
Yeah.
Right. And he brings such a tortured performance to this movie, man. We see this guy go through so fucking much in 2 hours. Like, it would be bad enough if his story were just like his mom was sick and she died. But then you add that whole element of like, she has a come apart and gets hurt and he's far away and his uncle's pouring the guilt on and he feels awful about it. And then she ends up dying and he's not there. And I mean, you watch Jason Miller and you see this man go through it. You see every bit of grief and raw emotion that he's feeling, and he presents it all perfectly when it's called for. What's amazing about this performance that we get is that when he needs to be father, like big dick Father Marin, right, doesn't miss a beat. Like that first time he walks into the room and he's talking to Reagan, that dude just put it on the table and was like, "Oh yeah, do this. You opened that drawer. That was cool. Do it again.
Do it again.
Yeah, whatever. Like, what do I give a shit about you? Like, or when he's talking to the detective and they have the whole thing about the movies back and forth and all that, just like when he perfectly is able to mask in those situations, but in his face you can still see kind of who he is and what he's going through, and that's something it's another level of acting, because like obviously his mother hadn't died, so yes, it was acting when he was sad that she had died in the movie, but then when you act on top of acting, right? So now you've got to be this sad guy who's presenting as a badass. And I can see both of those things in what you're doing. Hell yeah. That's unbelievable. When you're giving me these layers and you're so good at it that I see it all in your performance, that's nuts.
That is such a layered and tortured performance. Every time I watch this, there's something else I pick up from him. It's multifaceted, because sometimes I watch this and I'm like, man, he's a really dedicated priest. Like, I wish I could be that dedicated about anything. Anything, yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, man, even when I'm feeling doubt, even when I'm feeling self-doubt, even when I'm like, I want to be able to be that dedicated, where it's like, I'm going to put my big boy pants on. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to do my job.
Right.
On that level, he's great. On a totally different level, his self-awareness is fantastic.
Yeah.
Because he's not so... He's not so grandiose as to think that he's like, I'm doing the Lord's work.
Exactly.
Right? He's not grandstanding. He's not up on the pulpit. And like literally every time we see him at church, right, that he's doing mass or something like that, it's a look of disappointment.
Right.
Where it's like, either I'm not good enough for this work, or this work is meaningless. Like it's never like, I'm a priest and therefore I am better than you, which we do get a lot of that sometimes. And in fact, I think the only priest that we get that from is Marin, and rightfully so, because Marin is better than everyone.
Right. Yeah.
Because we don't get that from Father Dyer.
Right.
He's a very normal guy also. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I like this movie so much, is because nothing about the church is played the way that you would expect it to be played.
Right.
It's almost like
Yeah.
a matter of fact thing. Like, if demon, then God. If God, then church. If church, then anti-church. If it's like it's
Yeah.
all this, like, okay, well, if this exists, and if this, then that, and everything is just so matter of fact that as a skeptic like myself, I'm like, yeah, I can get on board with this, like
Right.
I love the way that he plays this role, where you can tell what he wants to do is help people, whether it's as Father Karras or as Dr. Karras, like you say. What he wants to do is help people in trouble, people who are struggling. He wants to get them through whatever it is that they're doing. And that's exactly what he is. He's a hero. He's an absolute hero, because you look at guidance counselors at schools, you look at therapists working in hospitals, you look at social workers. It's like, you guys are heroes. You guys are getting people through the deepest, darkest depths of their souls to become functioning members of society. And that's exactly what he does. He does that for Reagan. What Marin couldn't do, he can, because he takes it upon himself. It's such an amazing performance. I think ultimately, for me, as much as I was like, yeah, Ellen Burstyn is who I see this movie through and all that, like, he is the one who, when I think about this movie, he's the one I think of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just he really gives us everything in that. Whereas everybody else it does this amazing job of giving us, a very deep understanding of one type of person, a mother, a daughter, a badass priest. He's the guy who's like the most normal, right? Like he's a priest having a crisis of faith. He's a priest who has a doctorate, and is looking at things from all these different angles. He's the everyman and the hero. It's wild.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that leaves us with just one character left to discuss. So in the section that we're calling Something Different Inside You, we're again going to go back to Linda Blair, but we're going to dive a little deeper into Pazuzu. So how does Pazuzu work for you? Now, you as our professor of occult studies, is the depiction of Pazuzu in this movie accurate to the traditional mythological literary Pazuzu?
So from everything that I have found, that I have read, it really is. Pazuzu dates back to Mesopotamia. Like, he's an Assyrian deity that has always been presented as demonic and evil. He's not one of these. There's this weird line in the development of religion where at one point the Catholic Church was like, not only are we right, but all those other things you used to think were gods, benevolent or otherwise, fuck them all. They're all evil, right? And they just threw just entire millennia worth of gods and idols just completely under the bus. And they're like, all of that is evil. So it didn't matter whether or not in the religion that they were claiming to be better than, that they were considered benevolent. They just said, all that's evil. That's all bad. We're right. You're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Pazuzu's one they didn't have to do that with. and they were like, yeah, Pazuzu too. And everybody was like, oh, well, fuck yeah. Like, we know that already. So from everything that I could tell, he was always presented as a malevolent entity. The statues that we see of him are 100% accurate to real Assyrian statues Pazuzu, sometimes built to ward him off, sometimes built to trap him, like kind of like we see in the movie, or like the Jewish legend of the Dybbuk box, right? The idea that if it comes to Earth, you can trap it and then it can't get into anybody anymore. So all of that is right there. I love the possession angle of this movie, where the doctors are the ones who suggest it, right? And then they come at it from this very scientific way of, well, it could be somnambular form possession, which isn't really possession, because possession's not real. We're scientists.
Right.
But also maybe go talk to a priest because it might help out because it's all in her head. You know, I love the way that we're presented with that side of it too, especially with Karis being a priest and a doctor. Right. So we're given both sides of it there. I love that. This movie was, so many of the things that are portrayed in this actually come from these, you know, these books of how this would go down, right? The idea, things that now just any possession movie's got to check these boxes, got to speak a language that the possessee did not speak before. You know, it's, you know, weird body stuff. All of that stuff is, you know, actually found in books like Lesser Keys of Solomon and things like that as telltale signs of possession. And this was just the first movie to kind of bring that to light. What I love about this is they're the historical accuracy of how this would go down. The idea that the church doesn't even really believe in possession anymore, and some things like that. It's all of that goes great, but man, just the absolute unfettered, just meanness, just evil that we get from Pazuzu. There does not seem to be an ulterior motive here, except for, you know, hoping that Marin shows up so they can finally fucking duke it out, right? There's nothing that Reagan has that the devil would want and would have sent this demon to possess this girl to try to gain, you know, access to something, or, you know, or small fish to bigger fish. This is an unadulterated evil that wants nothing but to sow chaos in the lives of these people who are already like in transition and in rough waters. And it's so good in that aspect. You know, taking of Deborah Logan, the demon was able to get to her because she, you know, she was old and had dementia. You know, when evil lurks, there's, you know, they've got their own whole mythology that they built. But with this is absolute biblical possession. This is, demons are evil. They want nothing from this world except for to make it worse. And they want to see people suffer as they make it happen. So all of that, incredible. It's also worth noting that this movie, as a film that was released in theaters, we used that word powerful earlier. This movie was so powerful in what it depicted that Catholics were renting movie theaters to watch this thing. They were calling it the greatest recruitment film in the history of Christianity. There was a steep uptick in people reaching out to the Catholic Church for exorcisms after this movie was released, because it sat so heavy on people's minds that it was, this is more than a film when you look at its impact culturally. This thing was a phenomenon. And the Catholic Church, at one point, William Friedkin said the best thing that could happen to this movie is if the Pope himself denounces it. He knew he had a movement on his hands, that he had something here. He had absolutely captured perfection on film. that he was going to make an entire religion shit their pants. And he knew it. And it was a phenomenon in the world of horror. It was a phenomenon in religion. It took the world by storm, everything that this movie did. And ultimately, they ended up calling it such a great recruitment film for the Catholic Church because it depicted what it could be like. Because if you're a hardcore Catholic, then evil and demons are real and they are out to get you. And finally, so there's the Catholic aspect is finally somebody showed how fucking awful it would be if a demon got you. There's a very famous sign here in Alabama that you pass on Interstate 65, and it just says, "Go to church or the devil will get you." And it's this huge billboard that they put on like t-shirts and hats and stuff. This movie was that for the Catholic Church. It was like, yeah, go to mass or this shit happens to you. Look, it's real. Somebody filmed it. And people were freaking the fuck out because it was such a brutal portrayal of what possession could be like in a very real world setting. It's still, like it said, 52 years later now, it's still the gold standard in what a demon should be in a movie.
I can't really add anything more than what you said. I mean, it was so absolutely perfect. I will add only like a personal anecdote. As a kid, there were a lot of things that scared me. Like I was scared of fucking quicksand scared me.
Oh,
right?
Dude, yeah, that's product of our time, right? We were scared of quicksand, and we all thought at some point we were actually going to personally catch on fire and have to stop, drop, and roll. Just beat into us as children.
And I'm pretty sure that Johnny Quest was the reason why for both those things. I fucking love Johnny Quest, man.
Oh, dude, I do too.
If Hanna-Barbera TV shows could be ranked, I'm pretty sure I would rank Johnny Quest at number 1. Of all the things that scared me as a kid, exactly this demonic possession, Pazuzu, and just sowing chaos in the world through me, my body slowly deteriorating. That is what I was most afraid of. Terrified, absolutely terrified of it. And as someone who is, call me a skeptic, call me a non-believer, call me whatever you want, today I watch this movie and I'm still afraid. As someone who doesn't believe in this sort of thing, I'm still afraid. It gets in your bones, man. It gets in you, and you're like, I am powerless. It's almost Lovecraftian. It's when you stop and you start thinking like, how does this relate to the greater world of horror, right? Because this is, like you say, this is a distinctly Catholic thing that's in here. It's very Christian, but it's Lovecraftian. When you stop and you think about it, it's like the world of Lovecraft is these things that are way beyond us, that we cannot explain, that exist on our realm and some other realm, and maybe in neither of them and in between them. And I can't explain it. It causes me to do insane, wild things. And in the end, destruction reigns supreme. If that's not Lovecraft, I don't know what is. So if you can't get on board with that, this movie's not for you. And I think that this is one of those things, like, when something is iconic, it's like, oh yeah, you got to watch this thing. I don't know that I would recommend The Exorcist for everyone.
It is not a recommend for everyone movie. Absolutely not.
Yeah, and that's not to say that it isn't brilliant, because it is absolutely brilliant. This movie is, in its own way, perfect. But this is not a movie that I would recommend a lot of. Like, you have to really be a fan of horror to watch this, and I think you have to be a fan of cinema to watch this.
Yeah.
This is not a horror movie, right? Like, I've spoken countless times about my love for Friday the 13th. That's a horror movie.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, this is a film.
That's not one where we throw around the word film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a slasher movie, you know. It's
a flick.
It's a flick. And I love stuff like that. This is a film.
Yeah.
You know, this is cinema. This is it's art.
Yeah.
It's art, and it's beautiful, and it's sad, and it's devastating, it's horrifying, it's terrifying. It is, I think, one of the greatest horror movies, one of the greatest movies. I'll just say that. One of the greatest movies ever made.
Well, that takes us perfectly into it's time to rate this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you guys all know where this is going, but it's how we end our show, so we're going to do it anyway. Quick reminder, we never rate a movie against others. We've talked about these other possession movies that we've done and movies that Friedkin did. We're just talking about The Exorcist here. So what we do is we create a unique rating system for every movie that we do. We're not doing stars, buckets of popcorn, anything like that. It's unique. We're just talking about The Exorcist. So Dave, out of a possible 5 cocks sucked in hell, what do you get? I saved it. That's why I did not bring it up before the show. I knew exactly where I was going with this one.
Oh, man.
So, Dave, out of a possible 5 cocks sucked in hell, what do you give The Exorcist?
Dude, it's 6 cocks sucked in hell. This movie is it's Mary Poppins. It's practically perfect in every way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, look, we've before now we've both used the word perfect in the past 10 minutes, right? If you've listened to the episode and a couple of you have hung around for the whole time, we appreciate that. If you're listening to us now, you knew where we were going. This movie is absolutely 6 out of 5 cock sucked in hell. There's not a second of this movie that should be changed. If you're watching those later cuts that have the spider walk scene and all of that added back in, it really does add to it. It really does add to it, but you're not missing anything with those out. No. This isn't one of those situations where you have to watch the director's cut to fully get what they were trying to do with that movie. This 2-hour theatrical release is 100% perfect. And that is why I went back and watched the theatrical cut to do this show. So unreal. I'm right there with you. 6 out of 5.
Awesome. So thank you to everyone who has supported us for 150 episodes. Kind of wild that that has happened. And Daniel, thank you, man, because I think Shiver 2.0 started with episode 19.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy. I mean, that's an insane number of episodes. Like, my wife barely puts up with me on the level that you do, you know? So, thank you so much to you, to our listeners, to our viewers, to the people that engage with us on social media, to everyone, you know. Thank you to William Friedkin. I think he died a couple years ago, but thank you, man.
Thank you for existing.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda Blair, Ellen Burstyn. I don't know. I want to thank everyone. Freddy Krueger. Thank you, Freddy Krueger.
It's
Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
There we go. It's you know, it's been a hell of a ride, and it sounds like we're signing off right now, but hell no, do this 150, 250 more. We're gonna keep going. People keep pumping out stuff, and there's plenty of it we haven't seen. So this is 150. This is the official end of the year of the monster. So starting next week, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled nonsense of we found this movie. We want to do this one. This one just came out. Look, we know that there's stuff that came out last year that we didn't get around to because we were doing Year of the Monster. We were waiting for it to come to streaming. People have been all up in our ass about when are we going to do the Substance, Terrifier 3, all these things that got all this buzz last year. You know, we love to wait for these things to come to streaming so that there's a wider audience of people who have had the opportunity to see it. But there is a lot coming out now. There's some fantastic stuff coming. There's some fantastic stuff that just passed that we're going to get a chance to do. Back to just whatever catches our interest for that week, starting next week. And if you want to know what that's going to be, make sure you head to shiverpod.com where you can find links to all of our social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. All of those things at ShiverPod. You can find us on Instagram is where I spend most of our time. And that is where you're going to find out what we're doing each week. We're going to get back to looking at the calendar and scheduling about, 3 or 4 at a time. So keep an eye on it. We'll let you know what's coming next.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fight your